So, you know,
Want to cut some lights down?
yes, back there, Bennett, behind you, one of those sliders will dim these lights. Okay, is that better? Good.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're blessed to have a ball of helium 93 million miles out in space that provides all the energy that's ever been generated in the solar system. And you know, I love solar. I love solar power. In fact, I love it so much that when I take our place off grid, I'm not going to ask for a dime of taxpayer money. I'm not going to take a square foot of cropland. And I'm not going to ask my neighbors to pay for it or buy electricity from me. And so there is a place for solar, but it's not out here gobbling up our cropland. Now, there's a common argument about property rights, the property rights of the landowners. And you know, there's some value, there's some legitimacy in that. But in my study of rights, your rights end when they offend, or my rights end when they begin infringing upon somebody else's rights. And I think that's what's going on here. Because when you start taking public money, which is my money, you're infringing upon my right. There's the issue of food security. How much of our cropland can we gobble up? We've got the Chinese and everybody else buying our cropland. We've got Bill Gates buying our cropland. How much of our cropland are we going to convert to solar and take out of production? There is an issue of food security, and it's going to grow on us one of these days. That also gets into rights. And then what about property values and all the mess we see out there? So, you know, it is about property rights, but it's not just about the landowner's property rights. It's about everybody's property rights. You've seen this picture, it was in my emails. And I just bring that up because what that is actually taken from the middle of the Whitehorn project up in Gretna. There's still a cattle feedlot right there, who's one of my customers. And I bring that up just to say, you know, okay, look, it's cloudy, and none of those panels are pointing in the same direction. And they don't point in the same direction on a sunny day. So that facility cannot be generating the kind of power that they said they're going to put out. And it's just the way it is, and I don't think it's good. My journey with solar began in Remington, Virginia. Remington is, if you take 29, which bisects the state, straight north, when you cross out of Culpeper County, across the Rappahannock River into Fauquier County, you get to a town called Remington. And in October of 2015, the State Corporation Commission rejected an application for a 20 megawatt facility on 125 acres there in Remington. And the reason they did is because the planned $47 million solar farm was simply too expensive. It was going to cost something like $2,350 per kilowatt hour for generating power 22% of the time. And those are Dominion's numbers. Those weren't concocted by a guy like me. Those are Dominion's numbers. But Terry McAuliffe was not going to be stopped. So in 2016, he went back. This was 6 months later. He went back and offered to sell the power, announced that Dominion was going to sell the power to the state. Now, you got to wonder what that's all about. What are they paying for it? Are they paying a premium? Are they paying a discount or what? But in addition to that, they said that they would sell the associated renewable energy credits to Microsoft to help meet its renewable energy goals. Now, I'm not sure what a renewable energy credit is, but I was in a Farm Bureau meeting where they had an expert in there, and he left me with the impression that that is an energy credit that Microsoft can buy, spend money for it, and gain renewable energy goals, but then they get a dollar for dollar tax credit when they pay their taxes. I don't know if that's true or not, but it wouldn't surprise me, and I don't think that's a good way to conduct business. That particular facility was to provide enough power for 5,000 homes when the sun shines. So it went online in 2017, $46 million, 5,000 homes, $9,200 per home, using those numbers. But they only generate power 22% of the time, so that's 1,100 homes. If you do that math, then it becomes $41,818 per home. The only reason I bring this up is, in my opinion, if you were to take that kind of money and spend on those homes to have them generate their own electricity, you would then have 5,000 or 1,100 or whatever number you look at, independent little solar farms that if one of them fails, it's not going to affect the rest of them. And you know, they're doing their own thing there. And they'd be off grid, theoretically. But, you know, you could argue that the problem with that is it gives them a level of independence that maybe some folks in power don't like. But, I mean, really, if you think about it, we would be much better spending that money on those homes. Another one that caught my attention is called Fawn Lake. Fawn Lake is a very pristine lake. I think it's about 800 acres in Pittyslvania County, just southwest of Fredericksburg. It's secluded, it's a beautiful place. A lot of folks used to go back in there and fish. And I think it's still pristine, but it has been developed. I'm not showing that here. But, I can't remember what year now, they decided they needed to build the biggest solar facility east of the Rocky Mountains. So what they've done there, and actually the facility is not within sight of the lake, I don't think, but they still call it Fawn Lake. So there's a 500 megawatt project on 6,350 acres, biggest east of the Rockies. And I highlighted this because we just looked at a 20 megawatt facility that was supposed to power 5,000 homes, but now we've got a 500 megawatt facility that's supposed to power 5,000 homes. Now, after I did some more research, that was evidently a mistake on the part of the University of Richmond in their research. So, but I didn't want to take it out. I left it in there. It's more like about 111,000 homes for that project, and it's still under construction. There's a lot of controversy up there in that part of the state, and it's going to be ongoing. I don't know if they're online yet or not. But what I want to get to is this. A fellow by the name of Joe Lurch. I think he is with the Virginia Association of Counties. I can't remember his position, but he's been pretty heavily involved in solar power for a good while, as far as I know. And he turned out some information from the Department of Energy in January, this is showing the local government approvals of solar facilities. And I think you can see why I call this ground zero. Pittsylvania, Charlotte, Halifax County. If you look at those three, the third largest approval is Halifax with 838 megawatts. Pittsylvania is second with 853, and little old Charlotte County is at 1,377 megawatts of solar power. Charlotte's at the top. If you look at the top three, they're generating 26% of the capacity in the whole state. If you add the next two, Louisa and Surrey County, then they're producing 36.5%, 36.7%. And it's interesting, Louisa and Surrey, if I'm not mistaken, are the only two counties in the state that have nuclear power plants. But yet they're heavy into solar. I can't figure Louisa out at all. I don't know what's going on there. But Charlotte County is real interesting because they went to, they came to the Board of Supervisors with a proposal to build a 21,000 acre solar farm, costing 800 to 1.6 billion, 800 million to 1.6 billion. And that in itself is kind of interesting because I can think if you're investing in something, you want to narrow the cost from like double. I mean, that's just a lot of money in there. What is that all about? I don't know. But they could certainly done better than that. And it's going to provide 800 megawatts, enough power for 200,000 homes. Breaking ground in 2025 and bring the project online in 2027. 4,500 of the 21,000 acres are going to be fenced in. And the equipment's going to actually be on 3,000 acres. So the question that I bring up is, well, what are they going to do with all that acreage? What are they going to do with all that other acreage? Well, I don't know. But I can tell you that I've heard from reputable sources that in this county, there are some landowners that are very upset that they're only getting a fraction of the income that they were expecting for their leases. Because of this, they're only going to get paid for what's covered up in Silicon. So, big question there. But the county approved it, and the reason they approved it is because they're looking at about $9 million a year in revenue, and revenue from that facility for 35 years. And Charlotte County has a budget of between 26 and 38 million, a local budget. So that's a pretty big chunk of change they're looking at. So, when this thing began in Charlotte County, they hired a third party to advise them, and they advised against it because of various reasons, like project size, inability to mitigate impacts and uncertainties regarding the concept plans. In other words, it's infeasible. But the Planning Commission voted on a 6-3 vote to go proceed with it. So the same consultant went to the Board of Supervisors a little bit later and said the same thing. But the Board of Supervisors voted 4-2 to approve the site agreement. And the conditional use permits of 21,000 acres. They've approved conditional use permits for more than 1 gigawatt. In fact, if you remember that one of these earlier slides, it's actually 1.377 gigawatts. And all these projects are located within Roanoke Creek watershed, which includes 4 stops on the Virginia Birding Trail and Wildlife Trail, the New Charlotte State Forest, the Stack River, Battlefield Historic Park. And they claim that there's few creeks in this state, few regions in the state have gotten as much input from the conservation people as that one. And they're putting 5 solar farms on it. The same guy that provided the map and the table that I told you about, Joe Lurch, he had an article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch just this past Friday. The title of it was on Solar Virginia County's Step Up. As of Friday, we had 260 projects generating 11.6 megawatts of power, approved, not necessarily in production. At 10 acres per megawatt, that comes out to be about 180 square miles. And we're on track to increase that 200 to 217 square miles. So the counties are stepping up, maybe because of the imputed revenue stream. But, you know, I've had several supervisors, commissioners tell me that they have to vote for these things. Once somebody jumps through all the hoops, they have to vote for them. And I disagree. In 1989, a party by the name of Brattick, I don't know whether it's a man, a woman, a family business, or what, sued the county of Arlington. And they sued them because they applied for a special use permit to build a 2-family dwelling in a 1-family neighborhood. And they passed all of the, jumped through all the hoops and met all the restrictions, and the board turned them down. And of course he sued. It went through the court system, ended up in the Virginia Supreme Court, and they rejected this argument, stating that the governing body is not stripped of all discretion in the issuance of the use permit, merely upon showing that the technical requirements of a zoning ordinance have been met. So I think if somebody tells you that they have to vote for it, and maybe these folks over here will disagree, but they don't have to vote for it, they can vote against it. One of our planning commissioners has a neat tactic. I've seen it a few times, and I've seen it in other counties. When they've come before him, you know, they get their suits up there and they talk about the solar and how many houses are power and all that. And he just kind of sits back and he twiddles his thumbs and he bides his time. He's the last guy to talk. And he asks them, who's going to own this when it's all done? And that kind of puts a real crimp in the deal because they don't know. They're going to build it and then try to sell it. And it really puts a crimp in the deals of the landowners because now they don't know who they're going to be dealing with down the road. And that has brought a lot of attention in different counties around the state, that tactic. Of course, the state's not going to let us get by with manage our own affairs. There was a bill in the House of Delegates and a companion bill in the Senate, House Bill 636, establishes a procedure where the electric utility or independent, is able to obtain approval for certificate from state corporation commission for the siting of an energy facility rather than the governing body of the locality. So the State Corporation Commission, if they pass this, will be able to decide where and when sites will be given. And to add insult to injury, it goes on to say down there that anybody granted a certificate by the commission will be exempt from obtaining approvals or permits under the regulations and ordinances of the locality. And the only person that's standing between this and us is Governor Youngkin, because I know he's not going to sign it. But with the Democratic House and Senate, there's a good chance this will pass next year. This was carried over from this year, and I have one source that's pretty close to it. He says the whole thing was floated just to get the conversation started. They had no intention of passing it this year, but they're going to be going with both guns in 2025 to get it passed. And like I say, the only thing standing between us and that is Governor Youngkin.
Did you say it, Pat, what's the?
It's continued to 2025.
It was passed over.
Passed over to 2025.
For now.
I got an email Sunday from a guy that was going to come, but he can't. And it was interesting. He says, last year in April, I agreed to have solar panels installed on my roof. My solar project is not living up to the estimated output. And sadly, the promised federal rebate to help offset the cost did not get approved. I'm stuck with a very bad deal. Well, that rebate thing kind of struck me because I thought that was a given. But I asked him why that was. He said, I don't know. My accountant said it just doesn't qualify. So is the rebate income tested? I mean, you got to wonder if now they're income tested. I didn't know that. But the reduced output is no news. And so you think about it, and these are the 5 that I've talked about. And are they putting out what they say they are? Are they putting out what they claim they would? We don't know. There's just all kinds of uncertainty and lack of information in the whole thing. So what do we do about it? Well, I have an idea, and I'm going to float it to you all this evening. One of the problems is nobody knows what's going on. Like that place in Gretna can't be putting out what they said they're putting out. We don't know. We don't know about any of them. And nobody knows about them. They're just out there humming. So I would suggest that we've got Denise and Mary Franklin here. So I'm going to put it on YouTube. How about the state put together a public access energy portal? It wouldn't cost a lot of money at all. And have them create, administer, police, and enforce the website portal to collect, accumulate, and store real-time energy production and consumption data. Every energy-producing product will be required to provide a live feed to the portal with real-time energy production and consumption. And the public shall have access to all the data collected by the portal. That way, everybody can look and see what's going on. Are they really doing what they say they are? And I was going to just limit it to renewable energy, but why not go ahead and put the hydrocarbons in there and the hydroelectric dams? At least then we can compare and see which one's really doing the job for us. So, You know, is big solar realistic? I don't know. So far, I'm not real impressed with it. Is it worth the cost? What is realistic if it's not? And recently, just in the last couple of weeks, I've been reading a lot of developments from the auto industry regarding hydrogen. Hydrogen is the cleanest fuel we can have. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, BMW has actually come up with a system that can actually sit out in the open and collect and generate hydrogen from the atmosphere and make it available to your vehicle. So that's it for me. The next up is going to be Emily or David.
I'll start it off.
Okay. All right. Now, obviously, I didn't spend a lot of time in Pittsylvania County, but they will. That's why I didn't do it.
Hey, Chuck,
Yes.
I got one statement I'd like to make, please. For those that think that solar is generating power that can be used real time, it cannot, okay? You have to have something to stabilize the grid, and that something is natural gas. Okay? You have to have base load, which is typically natural gas, coal, or nuclear, but you've got to regulate at a 60 hertz stable hertz on the grid at all times, and that means the more solar you have, the more fossil fuel you got to burn. And people do not understand that. They think you plug your solar panel in and you disconnect from the grid. It's a fallacy. It's even true for the homeowners. I'm sorry. The only way it works on a home is if you're tied into the grid, and the grid regulates the electricity in your home. I just think people need to understand that, because there are people that say, oh, I'm off the grid. You're really off the grid. Unless you have a gigantic battery bank, you're not off the grid. And you're still buying and burning fossil fuel. People need to understand that.
All right, well, thank you all for allowing myself, as well as Commissioner Goard and our Community Development Director, Emily Ragsdale, to speak with you all this evening about the county's solar projects. I'm probably, out of the three of us, the least informed, and so I'm just going to kind of get some things started and then pass it off and hand the baton off to Ms. Ragsdale, who's really going to take a deeper dive into the approval process for a solar facility, and also talk about how this approval process has morphed and evolved since the first solar project was approved right around 8 years ago or so. I want to also point out that I don't think, I know myself, nor Emily or Robin consider themselves to be experts on this. There's a lot. You might say, oh, it's just one single topic. But as Chuck's already alluded to, there's a lot of moving parts to large-scale solar projects, and there's a lot of different facets to consider. But what we certainly do want to do is at least try to be transparent, meet with you all, and maybe answer some questions, and have an open and frank conversation about how the life cycle of a solar project and where we currently are with these projects. So, with that being said, just a little bit of background. And I think you all in this room probably know all this stuff, and Chuck's already touched on it, but over the past 10 to 15 years, there's been a considerable amount of federal and state legislation that's been aimed to promote clean energy sources such as wind and solar, and therefore reduce the reliance on non-renewable energy. So more of your traditional energy sources like coal, natural gas, things like that. And then the Biden-Harris administration has set a goal of a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035. So just to give you, a little bit of background, this is kind of the reason why I think the timing, all these solar projects have started gaining more momentum, that you can largely attribute to what's happened at the federal and state levels. To be fair, I think it's helpful to at least try to look objectively and identify the pros and the cons. And I'm not here to speak one way or another, whether, solar has its place or not. We're here to really discuss the process from a county standpoint. But I think, I would be inclined to say that there's merit to the notion that solar energy is clean. It doesn't lead to emissions. If you're a property owner and there's going to be a large-scale solar facility on your property, there's the potential for a long-term source of income in the way of a land lease with the solar developer / operator. If there's a solar facility in close proximity to where you live, I think, from what I understand, they're quiet neighbors. But now, as you look at the con side, there's the last con listed as aesthetics. So I think certainly, I know for myself, I'd much rather see the beautiful pastoral views of Pittsylvania County or any rural countryside for that matter, as opposed to, just hundreds of acres of panels laid out, one right after the other. You do have some maintenance, particularly in terms of vegetation control and fencing and things like that, but the panels themselves, is my understanding, they're really, there are not a ton of people working them and things like that. So the technology is fairly low maintenance, it appears. Now, a couple of the negatives about solar. The obvious requires an abundance of land. And my background prior to getting into the public sector is I worked for an engineering consulting firm that served, this was back in the early to mid 2000s, up until 2013, that served the coal industry. And so if you look, and we were, having to help some of our clients, which were coal companies, figure out how to refute some of the claims that these clean energy companies were making to cast a negative light on the coal industry. And so, wind farms and things like that, that was a big one at the time. People considered putting wind farms on top of reclaimed surface mines. I'm not going to speak yay or nay about that. Solar the same way. But the one thing we quickly realized, it takes considerable amount, much more land to generate the same amount of power. And anybody got an idea of what might be the most efficient power source, pound for pound or size for size? That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And some would argue that's a very clean source.
What, I didn't hear the answer.
Nuclear.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going outside of what I'm supposed to talk about. That's all I'm going to say about nuclear, but it's a lot you can talk about with all these different energy sources. We also know that, with the extensive amount of land disturbance that's involved with putting panels, in the ground, that you got to effectively manage the much greater likelihood for stormwater runoff. And how might that affect erosion and sediment control and increased recurrent flooding and things of that sort? It's also well documented that solar facilities impact wildlife by disrupting habitat. And I've already talked about the aesthetics. So as I said early on, the county has, solar projects were approved. The first one was back in 2016. And it's one of our smaller ones. And it's over near Dan River High School. It's called TPE Kentuck. And it was approved back in 2016. It occupies roughly 72 acres and only outputs 6 megawatts. So that's how it got started. And now I'm going to let Emily walk us through from there up until where we are today and potentially even beyond. And then Ms. Goard is going to talk about the implications from a taxation standpoint that these solar projects have. So, and then we of course want to answer any questions once we're all done. So with that being said, Ms. Ragsdale.
Hi, I'm Emily Ragsdale. I'm the Director of Community Development for Pittsylvania County. And as Dave said, I'm going to give you a general overview of solar, the county's processes, and then kind of our timeline that has got us from 2016 when we approved the first solar project to now.
There you go.
So just, a lot of times there's confusion on how solar is defined. And state code defines solar differently than our solar ordinance does. In state code, you have what are considered utility scale solar, which are what most people think of when they see the great big solar farms that are thousands of acres. But then they also have what people sometimes call community solar, but state code refers to as shared solar facilities. And what a shared solar facility is it's less than 5 megawatts. It has to be located in the service territory for that utility provider, and then their customers buy subscriptions. And they buy subscriptions to that project, and that offsets their utility bill. It does not have to serve the people directly adjacent to it. It just has to serve people that are within that service territory. So service territories could be large. So just because you live next to one of these does not mean that you could benefit and buy into the project necessarily. But it is, the electricity is connected to the grid, and it usually is, well, it has to be on a single parcel of land. So it could be a large parcel of land, but most of the time these are 20, 30 acre, 50 acre parcels. They're not thousands of acres. Our zoning ordinance does not differentiate between the two. We have been approached multiple times by community solar developers trying to get us to change our ordinance. The board took a very hard stance on that and said absolutely not. We define them all as utility scale solar. Our utility scale solar definition is up there as well. Basically, it's anything that's interconnected to the grid and sits on more than 5 acres. So we don't care if it is considered a shared solar project by state code. In our code, we treat it as utility scale solar. We don't differentiate between the two. So just kind of our timeline. As Dave mentioned, our first project was approved in 2016. As you can see, we did not have a solar ordinance at the time. Our current zoning ordinance allows for uses not identified in the ordinance to go before Planning Commission, and Planning Commission can decide whether or not they feel like it's an appropriate use for that area. That is what happened in 2016. I believe there were 5 or 6 conditions attached to that special use permit project, none of which were landscaping. So if you drive past the project just below Dane River High School, you will see teeny tiny little trees that are half dead. I cannot do anything to make them replace that because that was not a requirement of either the ordinance or a special use permit condition. And so their project is operating by the conditions that were in place at the time, but they were very minimal. And part of that was because in 2016, this was a new concept. I don't think anyone that was at the county at the time fully could comprehend what the impact of solar was going to be on our community. So they didn't have a good grasp on how to regulate it. Since then, we have taken multiple steps to try to better regulate it to reduce the impact on adjacent property owners. But as you can see, the first solar ordinance was adopted in 2017. It was then updated again in 2020, and that set a minimum of 5 miles between projects. At that time, we had already approved the majority of our solar projects. So there was not a lot that could be done to reduce the number that had been previously approved, but we adopted that 5-mile radius to help slow down the continued special use permit applications that were coming in regularly. But as you can see, in 2021, state code was modified to allow for siting agreements. And I'll get into what a siting agreement is in a little bit, but basically it allowed localities to get cash payments for siting of solar projects. So you can negotiate cash payments to help fund capital improvement projects, broadband infrastructure development throughout the county, etc. And so the board at the time decided to reduce that 5-mile radius down to 1 mile to allow for a few siting agreements to be approved. They were approved, but then in 2022, my office also does erosion and sediment control. And until she recently retired, we had one person doing erosion and sediment control for the entire county. That is not just solar, that is not just commercial projects, that is every single family dwelling that's being built, that's every commercial building that's being built, that's every solar project that's being built. She did all plan review and she did all site inspections. So in 2022, we realized that we could not manage solar. Solar in and of itself was a beast. When it started, we started getting projects in, just the sheer size and the number of acreage, and the amount of time that it took to do inspections. So we modified our erosion and sediment control ordinance to require these projects to pay for third-party inspectors. So what they do is the county actually retains, we have a third-party inspector that we have procured, and we have a contract with. The solar company is required to pay for those bi-weekly inspections, and then we also have to do inspections after every major rain event. So the third party goes out and we send the solar companies a bill every month for whatever those costs that the county incurs, and they do pay them and they are all current on those. But then again in 2023, we saw that we were not generating the revenue that we thought from siting agreements. And what was happening was we were getting a lot of small projects that are considered shared solar under state code and exempt from siting agreements. They were sliding in under the bigger projects that we could actually enter into siting agreements with. So we were not getting revenue and we were still getting more solar. So the board decided to put the 5 miles back in place. And then what we did was we also placed a 2% acreage cap on each zoning district in which solar is allowed by special use permit. So that's 2% of all A1 acreage, 2% of all M2 acres, and 2% of M1 acreage. All of that, you could have no more than 2%. So that put a halt on most of our solar development. Going the wrong way again. So these are our current projects, and I apologize, this is kind of small. We have 22 projects that are currently approved. As you can see, we've got some that are operational. And when I say operational, that does not mean that they have finished construction. And so they become operational when they are given the okay to connect to the grid. That could mean that the entire project is completed. That could mean that a small portion of the project is completed. Some projects, it's completion of the substation. So it varies greatly, and we as the locality do not get notified when that occurs. Sometimes, as Robin will speak to in a few minutes, we get notified by the state through the SCC, but most of the time we don't know when they become operational. I know that Maplewood is still under construction in all intents and purposes because they still have an active stormwater permit and they still have an active land disturbance permit with the county, so we have not closed out stormwater or erosion sediment control for them. And they are still in the process of putting in their required landscaping. Whitehorn is the same way. We are still working, they still have an active stormwater permit, they still have an active erosion sediment control permit, and we are still working on them to get their vegetation management and their landscaping into compliance. And then, we have 2 that are under construction. One is Caden Interjects. It's on the Henry County line in the southern portion of the county. And then the Southern Virginia mega site solar project at Berry Hill. That is also under construction. We have, actually that should say 2 in plan review. Blue Ridge, which will be on 703 past Chatham High School, and then there are 2 projects in One is in the town of Gretna, one is right outside of the town of Gretna. Those are in plan review right now, but we still have 10 projects that we have yet to receive plans on. So just some statistics. These are the acres that we have active in operation, under construction, and then still with SUP approval that have not started construction. And so those would be the ones we're doing plan review on, and the ones that we have not yet received plans on yet. But as you can see, we are over our acreage caps in both A1 and M1. So what that means is, even if a company could find acreage outside of that 5-mile buffer from another project, I can never accept their application because we are over that acreage cap. So what this does is this is essentially put a halt on solar development in the county. Now, these are approved projects, and I'll speak to this in just a minute, but there are 3 years expirations placed on each special use permit when they are issued. The state, I believe it was last year, it may have been the year before, gave both an automatic extension on on special use permits that were granted after 2020. They gave an automatic extension until the end of 2025. Now, that's automatic. You can go before the board and ask for an extension to 2026. So even projects that should have expired this year, they don't expire for at least another year. Projects that expired last year, they were automatically extended through the end of 2025. And that was state legislation that was passed due to COVID and issues that arose from that. And some of it was just interconnection and getting approval through PJM for interconnection for solar projects. But at the local level, we have people ask us all the time, hasn't this project expired? You know, why can they still move forward? And the answer is state legislation granted them that right, at least for another year. At that time, they would either have to adopt more legislation or those projects would automatically expire. If they automatically expire, then some of this acreage would fall off because it's not an approved project anymore. We still have quite a bit of acreage. I mean, in A1, you've got 1.6% to have to come off before I could ever accept another project. And really, you have to have more than that because you're going to have enough acreage to make a viable project. So we've got a long way to go before we could start accepting projects again. So these are our current projects. Sorry if these maps are kind of hard to see, but the one on your left is going to show the red lines are transmission lines. So as you can see, most of the projects, they're going to follow transmission lines. It's the cheapest way for them to interconnect to the grid. And most of them, as you can see in the other picture on the right, those are the 5-mile buffers. So there's very few areas that are on a transmission line that are outside that 5-mile radius of another project. Most of the areas you're going to see are going to be up towards the lake. You don't have as much flat land up there, which is what these projects want. So that's not going to be a highly sought out area for them to develop. Most of what they want are relatively flat areas that, you know, have always been historically farmland, so it's open areas. They don't have to go in and do a lot of tree removal. And it's relatively close to the grid, so it is easy for them to have that interconnection point. So as I mentioned before, siting agreements. And this is allowed by the Code of Virginia, Section 15.2-2316.7. And basically it requires any applicant for a solar project or an energy storage project, which is battery storage, which is going to be the next big thing that we will start seeing. They have to go to the host locality. They have to submit in writing that they are planning to locate in the locality. And then they enter into negotiations with the governing body for a siting agreement. And the siting agreement can include terms and conditions, but it can also require cash payments or upfront payments. And those payments go, financial compensation to address capital needs, capital improvement plans. It can go to offset the fiscal budget. If there are shortfalls in the budget, it can offset that. And then, as you can see, broad deployment of broadband is another use. But it has to fit within those use categories in order for those payments to be accepted and used by the locality. So currently in the county, these are the projects that we have siting agreements for. Now I will tell you that Curry Solar is a no-go, because once that radius was dropped from 5 miles to 1 mile, they did not get their application in, and a small utility scale solar slid in, or community scale solar slid in, and so now that small solar project put them within 5 miles of another project. So they cannot submit an application. We just still show them up here because we did originally negotiate a siting agreement with them. But as you can see, we negotiated payment structures for them. So Hillendale Solar, it's the second from the bottom, they owed us $30,000 the day their special use permit was approved. And they did pay that. Now, we would not get another payment from them until their building permit is issued. And then we would get a final payment from them the day that they became operational. And all of that money would go either into the general fund to offset budget expenses or to capital improvement needs throughout the county. But the last one, Sourback Strata, is a battery storage facility. And we have yet to see plans or see any movement on that one, so I'm not sure if that one will move forward or not. And at this time, I will turn it over to Robin so she can go over taxation, but I'm sure we will have some time for questions at the end.
Hello, I'm Robin Goard. I'm the Commissioner of Revenue for the county, and I'm going to talk about the assessments of the solar farms, and then I'm going to talk about land use a little bit. Excuse me. So if you want to know how the projects are valued, so if the project is owned by a utility company, which would be like AEP or Dominion or RTO utility or something like that, it's going to be assessed by the SCC regardless of what the wattage is, the megawatts. So the SCC they assess the solar facility, they send the information to the Commissioner's office, and then we apply our real estate rate to that assessment. If the project is greater than 25 megawatts and independently owned, it's going to be also assessed by the SCC. They would in turn send that information to the Commissioner's office, make the assessment, and apply our real estate rate to that. If the project is leased by a utility company, the SCC will still assess the utility company, but the county will assess the real estate, the land that it's on. So that's like Emily talked about before, some of the projects are not owned, or the land is not owned by the utility company, they're leasing it. So we still, as a county, can assess that. Okay, taxation, deferred taxes. What are deferred taxes? As Emily stated, a lot of this land that they're putting the solar farms on have been in the county's land use program. So if you're in the land use program, your land is assessed at a land use rate and not 100% of fair market value. So if you decide you want to change the use of your property and put a solar farm on it, then it comes out of land use. And when it comes out of land use, because the use of the property is being changed, then we do what's called a rollback. And we're able to roll back on that property and recapture the taxes at the fair market value. You pay the difference. And we can do that for up to 5 years in the current year. So you may be subject to 6 years of rollback tax. It just depends on how long it's been in the land use program. Okay, then I have a few more things we didn't put in there. Someone asked who was responsible for the payment of the deferred taxes, and that is the landowner. Now, a lot of these companies, they will have an agreement with the landowner, and they'll say, well, we'll pay your rollback tax, because some of these, have generated lots and lots of dollars in rollback taxes. So the solar farms, I think basically all of them we've had so far, the solar farms or the owners have paid the rollback tax for the landowner. The other thing is the deferred taxes is collected by the treasurer. Like I said, the commissioner's office generates the rollback, the assessment, and then we send it to the treasurer's office. They will send the landowner a notice telling them how much they owe for the 5 years or 6 years, whatever we've generated, and then the treasurer will collect that. And so far, all the taxes have been paid. We don't have any that are unpaid at this time of all the rollbacks that we've done. And just some information that we jotted down. Currently, we have 3,493 acres in the county that's solar farm. Now, all of that was not in land use, but the majority of it was. 2,169 of those acres are owned by Dominion Electric. Dominion Energy, excuse me. And that's basically all I have. If anybody have any questions about the assessment or deferred taxes, I'd be happy to answer that for you. Yes.
Ms. Gord, just for clarification, your office is the one that assesses the land, like the land use, and you do the deferred taxes, and the Board of Supervisors have no control over that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Say that loud.
Yes, sir.
No, seriously, because in our budget cycle, that was news to me. And I wanted to make sure that the citizens know that anytime we talk taxes here, it's not all about the Board of Supervisors collecting taxes or setting tax rates, but your office also has the authority to do the land use, raise the land use tax rate, and to do the deferred taxes. So it's not a Board of Supervisor action.
Okay, well, actually, the commissioner has the authority to set the land use rate, not the tax rate, but it's a land use rate.
That's correct. And recently, you just increased the land use tax from 500 to 600, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but the Board of Supervisors didn't do that.
No, they did not.
Okay, that's all the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So you made a statement that Dominion Energy owns 2,900 acres out of the 30. I think maybe you misspoke, and maybe they own the project, but they do not own the real estate, correct?
Well, some of it they do own. They own, let's see, I got a couple parcels. I know one of them they own, and it is,
They do own Berry Hill. They purchased that entire project.
yeah, and that's over 1,000 acres. It's 1,255 acres.
And that was included in your 3,400 acre
Yes.
that's in production now, so they actually own the construction. But that's well, how many other sites do they own outright?
That they own outright?
Yeah, the property, the real estate.
Let's see.
And you may not have it at your.
I don't know off the top of my head. Most of their projects, they do acquire the project Some of the other utility companies will allow or retain the developer to do operations and management and manage the project for them, and they just do a power purchase agreement and they buy the power off of the site. Dominion does not do that. They acquire the entire project. And some of that, they do acquire some of the land, especially any of the substations that have to be built. They acquire any property the substation is on. And it just kind of varies from project to project.
And I actually have 4 parcels of land that I have marked that are being assessed by the SEC under.
Okay, so that's Dominion owning the whole project. Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that, so I'm a landowner too, but that seemed to be a big number to me. So thank you.
Yes.
And communication you and I had, you said that some of the facilities are taxed at land value only.
Yes, that's correct.
So the infrastructure that's been installed on that land isn't being taxed.
No, it's not, because it's under, the wattage is so small, it's under the, let me back up. Okay, state code says in 58.1-3660, the code says 20 megawatts. If you talk to the SEC, they say 25 megawatts. And they realize that the state code says 20. So I said, well, why do you tell us to use 25 megawatts or less? And nobody can answer that. But, unless somebody in here might know, I don't know. But anybody that you ask, that, any county, they're going to tell you 25 megawatts or less is the magic number. So if it's 25 megawatts or less, and if it's owned by Dominion, or if they have an agreement with Dominion or any utility company, the SEC is going to assess it regardless of the megawatts. Now, if it's like these, the first one we had, that TPE Kentuck, Rourke Mill, Monroe, Strata, Whitmore, none of those we assess anything but the land, because they're under that 25 megawatts. And they're not connected per se to an electric company that's being assessed by the SEC.
So is it fair to say that with the recent reduction in the tax rate, that these solar farms will be paying less taxes than they were under the 62-cent rate?
Yes. And I say that because the value of the land was not changed.
Yes.
The appraisal company left the assessed value at $11,000 per acre. So when the tax rate dropped, that means they're going to pay less in tax because they didn't have an increase in the valuation.
Okay. And of course, if the SEC is setting the value, the appraiser has nothing to do with it, am I correct?
That's correct, but only on the ones that they assess.
I understand.
Yeah. Like the Dominion.
So right now, that's Maplewood
Yes.
and Whitehorn. And we expect Sycamore 1 to be valued by the State Corporation Commission when we get their annual report in September. Because that one just went into production status in March 23.
Yes.
So what they do is it's similar to personal property and real estate taxes, whatever is active as of January 1 for that year. So that's
I see. Yeah. Mr. Tucker.
Yes, ma'am. First a comment, then a question. As far as the burden of that tax on the citizens, I guess the solar companies caught a break when we reduced the tax rate itself to Mr. Angier's point, okay? But we couldn't leave it at 62 cents. People were struggling to get on board with what we said. Now, my question is this, and it may be more for Ms. Ragsdale. In the siting agreement, okay, machine and tool tax, is it possible that those panels and those infrastructure, that infrastructure could have been taxed?
So, can you all hear me, or do you need me to get the mic? Okay.
Let me finish, because I think it's true opportunity cost, or we missed that opportunity at the outset, and I think we could have been collecting taxes going forward, machine tools, based on what I've been reading and what I've been able to dig out. So help me out.
So, the state code allows the locality to adopt what they call a revenue share, which is $1,400 per megawatt in lieu of the machinery and tools tax. Or you can apply your machinery and tools tax. All of this came about the same time that the siting agreement did in 2021. And so at that time, most of our projects had already been approved. There have been very few projects that have been approved since then. Most of them, I say most of them, most of the ones without siting agreements that were approved after that are small 5 megawatt projects, which are exempt anyways. In our siting agreements, because we did not adopt a revenue share program, and we crunched numbers, we talked to the SCC, they helped us run numbers, and it really depended on the size of the project as to which one was better than the other. And so we did not want to lock ourselves into having to only do a revenue share, because if you adopt revenue share, that is all you can ever do. You can never pick and choose who you apply machinery and tools tax to. So what we did is in the siting agreements, we adopted, or we structured a tax schedule for them that is basically equivalent to a revenue share, because when we ran the numbers for those larger projects, we were making more if we taxed them with a revenue share rate of $1,400 per megawatt. But the smaller projects, we were not. So it just kind of depended on whether or not the SCC applied the value or we applied the value as to what came out, better off for the county. So in those siting agreements, we did negotiate different tax structures, and we did front load those tax payments because we don't know how long these projects are going to be here. They say 25 to 40 years. I don't know. I don't think anyone here knows. I don't know that anyone in the state knows. So what we did not want to do is estimate revenue that was coming in to the county on a 30-year scale, and then 10 years later they were gone, and we didn't get much of anything out of it. So what we did was we front-loaded those tax payments. So for the projects that have siting agreements, they pay much larger, they have a much larger tax, they owe tax, like a much larger rate of taxes. It's been a really long day. For the first 5 years, and then each year that kind of drops off. So they don't pay much in the last 5 to 10 years of their lifespan, but that's because we wanted to make sure that we could get as much money out of them as we could up front before, they just skipped town if that's what they were going to do. So to answer your question, yes, we do negotiate different tax schedules in those siting agreements, but we only have 3 solar projects with those siting agreements. The other ones that were approved after we could do siting agreements were small and exempt from that and exempt from taxation generally anyways.
Thank you. I believe that the larger ones at the outset would have been happy to pay you whatever you wanted. But in my mind, I guess, just fuzzy numbers, it appears to me that we would have been better off as a county had we, did the machine and tools tax, and we were taxing these panels across the county. That's
And it just kind of varies depending on the project and the size of the project and who applies the value.
I get that, but I'm saying, you know, the larger projects.
It would have been, if we could have had siding agreements from the beginning, we would have been much better off as far as revenue generated.
Thank you.
Yes.
So the cited, or so the ones from the beginning that did not have a cited agreement, are we receiving any revenue from them?
That's what Robin just
Yes.
discussed, and I'll let you.
Those are the ones that we're only assessing the land because they're under 25 megawatts.
Or if they're greater than 25 megawatts, like Whitehorn and Maplewood, right?
But then that's SCC.
The SCC values it, but we get that tax revenue. We take their assessed value and apply our tax rate to it, and we would collect all of that. There you go.
My question, I think it's for you. So the 22 projects, is that it and there's nothing else that would be approved? Is that the total?
At this time, yes.
There wouldn't be anything else in the pipeline? That would be
No,
22.
there are no other projects in the pipeline. I get calls on a weekly basis from companies wanting to submit special use permit applications or questioning the interpretation of our ordinance because they think they found some loophole to submit an application. But we are over the acreage cap. Yep. So until some of those projects fall off, we can't accept anything else. Our ordinance doesn't allow it.
The slide was kind of hard to read when they were all listed up there, it was so small for me. But the Hopewell is, I didn't see any numbers by it as far as attainment up front. Is it operational, Hopewell, yet, or have you received?
No, Hopewell is not operational, and we have not received plans for that one yet. That one, we don't get a payment for that one until we issue a building permit, and like I said, we have not gotten plans at this time. But when we issue a building permit, we will get $750,000 from that project at issuance. And then once they start generating power, that's $1.5 million that they will owe the county.
Emily, can you dig down a little more on when the projects fall off? What does that mean?
So
Which estimates that?
when all of our projects, I say all of our projects, the majority of our projects that were approved after our ordinance was adopted and the county kind of had a grasp on how to regulate them a little bit better at the time and started applying their own conditions to the special use permit. They placed a 3-year expiration on the special use permit project. So if they did not start construction within 3 years from the date that the special use permit was issued, the SUP expired. Now, what that would mean now is the project would fall off, but we're still over that cap, and they're likely still within 5 miles of another one, so they would not be able to resubmit an application to me.
Okay.
However, state code now allows for the automatic extension to the year 2020 through the year 2025 for all special use permits. So any locality, and that's not just solar, but it does include solar. So any locality that has put an expiration date on a special use permit, it has been automatically extended, and there's nothing that I can do until that automatic extension has ended. Now, they can go before the Board of Supervisors and ask for an extension through the year 2026 or longer, but that's not automatic. They have to go and actually request that.
I understand that piece. I guess my question is more geared to an existing operational project. What causes it to fall off in terms of the county's designation? And take Whitehorn, for example. If I say that it just becomes antiquated and it's not producing anything, what prevents it from falling off of the special use permit in terms of the county and just going somewhere to a neighboring parcel and doing the same thing again?
So, in our ordinance, basically it would have to be decommissioned. And our ordinance requires that if it fails to produce power within a 12-month period, then it has to be decommissioned. And on every project that we have in the county, we hold a decommissioning bond. So we require a licensed engineer to draw up a decommissioning cost estimate. They have to include inflation in that. We go back and evaluate it periodically. We do not allow them to include salvage value. They all try to say, you can take this and recycle all of this, and they'll come back with a number that's higher than it's gonna cost them to decommission the projects, and we don't allow them to include that. And we hold a bond for the life of the project. And that bond will go up over the life of the project as we experience inflation and the cost of things continue to escalate. But once that project fails to produce power for 12 months, they have to decommission it. If they don't, we cash in on that bond and we hire a contractor to go in and decommission the project and return it back to as close to the original state as we can get it. But when it's decommissioned, at that point, it would fall off of the acreage and the 5-mile radius.
If they have to go and decommission it, how long will it take to use the land again? Because solar panels really mess up the land and it messes up the eco and you can't farm on it. So if you use it for 12 months and it doesn't do anything, 40, 50 years till we can use the land? Is there an answer to that?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not gonna stand up here and try to act like I do, because I don't know. And that's a hot topic that is being talked about at the state level. I went and sat on panels. We were not invited to participate, but the city of Danville was. And they notified us, and I went to Richmond and sat in and listened to panel discussions, and they talked about prime farmland and prime forested areas and what those impacts are and how they can balance, because that's what the state is trying to do, is balance prime farmland, prime timberland with solar development. It was just, I don't know what came out of it. I have not seen their final review. But that is something that they are at least considering at this point, because I don't think it's been considered before now.
I think everybody would like to know exactly how many, how many acres have been approved and are either been approved or under construction or in service, and the number of acres that are in the pipeline, particularly those that may have been grandfathered in before the new ordinance.
So we're right around 18,000 acres.
So that hasn't changed a whole lot. But are there others that are at the very beginning stages that don't show that, where an application's been made?
So once the board, in 2023, when the board implemented the 5-mile radius again, and adopted that 2% acreage cap. We had one project at that time that was in the pipeline, so they were approved. But since then, I cannot even accept applications. So there are no applications that are in the pipeline for solar at this time.
So you're saying that if a project was started, I mean, not construction, but all of the paperwork, but it falls within y'all's guidelines of the 5 mile, it's still on hold because of the total usage.
Yes.
Emily, so the under construction acres, is that actually acres that are covered in panels already?
So, not necessarily. So we issue special use permits, we issue it on the entire parcel. So Sometimes they tell us at that time, out of these 3,000 acres, there's gonna be 800 acres under panel. But that can change, because once they get in and they start having to do stormwater, and they start having to try to mitigate erosion and sediment control, that can kind of shift their project. So we don't really base anything off of, and none of these numbers that I give you are gonna be under panel, because I don't have hard concrete numbers except for the ones that are actually built, or that we have approved plans for. So that is acres that special use permits have been approved on. It does not mean that they will all be covered in panel by any means. It'll be far less than that.
Okay. So, but looking at that screen, 3,265 acres, give or take, are covered in panels in the county currently.
They have an approved project on them, so a special use permit has been issued for that parcel of land. But we issue it for the entire parcel, not just what's under panel.
The under panel would be less.
Yes.
That's the deeded parcel.
Okay, I see.
And I would just like to add, as far as that, if it's in land use, we wait until we get the special use permit from Emily's office, and the company has to provide us with a copy of their site agreement. So we'll know how many acres is going to be covered under panels, and that's what we actually take out of land use. So a farmer, if he has a 100-acre tract and only 70 is being used for the solar farm, the other 30 he still can use and have in land use if he's still farming it, or it's in forest or something.
The bonds, can you explain those to us? Like if the solar company sells to another LLC, which we're seeing all over the state, how does that bond stay intact?
We make sure that we have a bond in place at all times. We've had that happen one time where they did not actively notify us that it was changing hands. But the bond was still active when we found out. So we got with the company and they got us another bond, so that was fine. But that is one of the requirements of their special use permit, that's a condition. So if they were to fail to provide a bond, I could go in and pull their special use permit, and they would be out there pulling panels out of the ground. And they don't want to do that, so they are usually really good about making sure that anything that is required of them, that they do.
But if they've been in operation for 5 years and they go bankrupt and there's no one to buy, there's no one interested in that land, what happens?
I mean, the land, most of the land is still owned by the property owner.
So it falls on them, probably.
Yes and no. So we would still have the bond, because the bond is a third party, it's held by a third party bond company. So as long as that bond is still active, at that time we would just cash in on that bond, and we would go in and decommission the project. So it could happen. I'm not going to say that it won't happen, but it's probably not likely that it would ever fall back on the property owner.
Okay.
Most of the later contracts that were written after 21, the bond covers it, and the real estate has to be, once it's decommissioned, the real estate has to be put back into its original state that's in the contract. So if it was in farmland, they got to make it available for farmland. If it was in forestry, it goes back into forestry. That was a big part of the contractual restraints that we put in 2021.
Yes. I've got like 3 things. So the center was 5 miles, and then for a brief time it was reduced to 1 mile, and then now it's back at 5 miles?
Yes.
How brief was that 1 mile?
I think it was about a year.
Okay.
A little over here.
Yeah.
And my second concern is the discrepancy between the 20 and the 25 megawatts. I mean, that may make a difference, that some of them would have been not able to be in land use. There probably is some between 20 and 25. And you're not allowed to let them be in land use if they're under 25, but I bet there's some that are between 20 and 25. So it was really 20. So who's telling you 20 and who's telling you 25?
Okay, I think you're confusing two issues.
Okay.
If it's in land use, okay, and they want a solar farm there, it has to come out of land use because they're changing the use of the land. So that has nothing to do with the 20 or 25. Now, where the 20 is 20 megawatts or 25 megawatts. The state code says 20 megawatts. SCC says 25 megawatts or less.
Okay.
Or 26 megawatts or more, just depending on what you're looking at. And I've asked the question, and the SEC will tell you, they say, well, state code says 20, and we go by 25. So that's what we go by is 25.
Well, it seems like they're getting away with fudging the balance there to their advantage and to our disadvantage. And then the third thing I was wondering is, what would it take? We hope this is bad enough, and we like that the code, that changed the ordinance. We like what the ordinance is. It's like we're getting this feeling like it just can't get any worse. But what would it take to change the ordinance?
So we cannot place a moratorium on solar. State code does not allow that. So we do not have the authority, no jurisdiction has the authority to place a moratorium on solar. And even if our ordinance, this kind of goes back to the legislation that Chuck referenced earlier, even if our ordinance were to remain as it is, or even tighten slightly to further reduce their ability, state code can always come in with legislation like the one that's being proposed and take the right away from the locality to regulate our own land use, which is what that bill would essentially do. So if the company felt that the state or the locality was taking too long to approve their land use approvals, to issue their zoning permits, they could basically bypass the locality and all of our zoning or regulations and go straight to the SCC, and the SCC could issue a permit overriding whatever our local ordinance said and allow them to locate anyways. And there's nothing that anyone at the county could do regarding that. So it's always kind of a balancing act between local ordinances and state code. And luckily that legislation was kind of tabled for this year. They put it on hold, but it could come back again next year, and it likely will come back again next year. And it just depends on how much push they're getting from solar developers or what federal initiatives are pushing as well.
And who makes the local ordinances? Who decides that?
It's adopted by the Board of Supervisors.
But now, very quickly, but keep in mind, the Commonwealth of Virginia operates with the Dillon rule, which this is what Ms. Ragsdale was explaining. The Commonwealth of Virginia is the parent, Pittsylvania County is the child, so the state is always going to supersede what ordinances we can actually put in place.
Yes, we only have the authority that the state expressly gives us. So we only have the ability to regulate things that the state tells us that we have the ability to regulate. So if they were to take away our ability to regulate solar, we would just lose the ability to regulate land use as it relates to solar.
And just for clarification, I know that you put up briefly that 2035 was the date. Yeah, I think you have that on yours. So the federal government, the current administration, passed a law 2.5 years ago that these power companies, if they do not have a certain amount of solar and wind, they've got to shut down fossil fuel power plants. Shut them down. 2035 is the drop dead date. So these folks are not coming in here because they really want to. They're coming in here doing this because they have to, all over the United States. But the fossil fuels, the coal plants are going to be closed on 2035 if they don't have enough green energy credits to leave them open. It's fact. So the county has put a percentage up there that's very, very reasonable, and I can't see where there's going to be any further construction in Pittsylvania County from the ordinance that I see today. But it's, unfortunately, we're in the green energy sector, and you're going to look at wind turbines or solar panels, but it's going to be one or the other. That's federal law, period.
I believe the federal government is basing this climate change stuff on the wrong science. It's so simple. 8th graders can tell you that green plants emit oxygen, and we animals and humans use the oxygen, and we put out carbon dioxide. It is not a pollutant. Carbon dioxide is needed for every green plant on the planet. And here we're trying to, because the government's forcing us in this, we're trying to do away with what is essential for life. And we just got the wrong science just from the beginning. And I just think we need to think very carefully what we put up with when we're trying to save the world, when God's got it in His hands, and He knows we're to be good stewards of what we have and look after this world. But boy, we know we need to operate on truth, and the science is just wrong. And that's my little piece that I want to say.
Yes. Hey, Emily, how are you? Good, how are you? As the gentleman just made the comment, I think keywords there, current administration, and hopefully that current administration will not be the administration after this November. Emily, I'd like to ask you some questions about the bonds. I think you clarified that for me tonight. So after the 18,000 acres are completed, in theory, are we looking at $1 billion of bonds that this county can count on for those of us who will see it or may not see it to decommission and reclaim those farms?
I don't know the exact dollar amount. The majority of the projects, it's anywhere from $1 million to, I think, $5 million is one of the larger bonds that we have. We do hold those. We do regularly check those to make sure that they're current. We do have requirements in place that if they are going to go with a different company, they have to give us a 30-day notice before they can enter into an agreement with another company, so that we do know that that bond is changing. Like I said, we've only had one instance where the company changed hands and did not notify us. We immediately, as soon as we found out that they changed hands, we went after them to get another bond in place. Normally, if they hear the words, "I'm going to pull your special use permit," they get on it. I've only had one that we have actively started the process of pulling their special use permit for lack of vegetation management. And that one, it took them about 2 weeks after they got my final letter to have the entire property manicured, and we haven't had a problem since. So I can't guarantee anything. I'm not going to stand up here and say that yes, I guarantee you that it's going to be in place, but we do everything within our power to make sure that at the end of the day, if something has to be decommissioned, that there is a bond to cover that.
Well, it just seems to me, knowing the cost that Chuck shared and knowing the cost that we know by practical thinking that it takes to put these solar sites up, that $1 million in 2024 won't even scrape it with accumulated interest through a bond program to take care of the collateral damage and destruction that these solar utility sites are causing for our local communities. So I guess I would say to the elected officials, the appointed officials here tonight, we're going to make sure we speak with confidence that rural Virginia and Pittsylvania County will not bear the burden of the 2020 Clean Economy Act of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We will not. And we will stand up for what we believe is right for our communities. and the aesthetic value, the quality of life, and what Pittsylvania County represents today is what we will continue fighting for, period. Thank you. Please run the office. Please. Run the office.
Stay on.
Thank you. Good, what you said. I didn't know when, because I so, they let me know, or do we have to send someone out, or are they supposed to?
I'll let Robert, because that applies more to taxation than it does necessarily zoning.
For the ones that are the larger scale facilities that will be owned through Dominion, the SEC will let us know because they have a initial interconnection date that they have to file with them. It's on their paperwork. And then when it becomes in service, they have to let them know, because as she said, it becomes energized. And so they have to know that it's online, that it's a working facility. So the
It's
SEC.
timely then that you're notified, I mean, it's.
Well, we had a problem with one. They had actually started, because the SEC called me and wanted to know, for some kind of way, they got word that it was in operation, and they called me and wanted to know if it was, and I checked, and I said, yes, it is. And they started like in October of the year before, and the SEC called me in April of the following year. So he said, well, they're not supposed to be operating because they have not passed all the final inspections. And he said, so they shouldn't be energized. So, but they were, so.
Folks, it's getting late. And I want to thank the three of you for being here. Thank you for all your information.